Ever wonder what the game shows of the past were like? Before the dawn of television, Americans were first acquainted with quiz and trivia gameplay through radio. Interestingly, this new mode of entertainment started as a way to get more people to buy newspapers.
There's a newspaper in Brooklyn, the Daily Eagle, that held contests called current events bees. And after holding a current events bee, they would publish a special edition with all the questions and answers that had been used in the bee. And that edition of the paper would always sell better than the regular editions. And so when commercial radio became a thing, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle began doing a daily show called Brooklyn Daily Eagle Quiz on Current Events. And it was used as a tool to sell newspapers, and it really kind of took off. It had something like a 17 or 18-year run.
That's Adam Neediff, a game show historian and author who's worked behind the scenes at popular shows like Wheel of Fortune, The Price is Right, and Nickelodeon's Double Dare. Neediff says that the success of the quiz show format took off on radio and continued until the 1950s, when TV became the new mainstay. By 1955, half of all U.S. households owned a black and white set, and millions tuned in each night to watch their favorite game show. One popular series was the $64,000 Question, which aired from 1955 to 1958. Chosen contestants answered general knowledge questions that became progressively harder as the stakes doubled until it reached the final level of $64,000. Today, that amount would equate to over $620,000.
On the $64,000 question, they would bring the contestants on stage on a staircase, just a nice little flourish, a nice little touch to bring them on. And then it's time to select the category that you're going to go for the big money. And they would show this wall of categories, and you would choose your category, and the host would push a button, and an IBM sorting machine would start spitting out question cards that had all of the questions that would lead you to the money. And then when the stakes began getting really high, they would walk you into a booth on stage. And the idea was it was so the contestants couldn't hear anyone saying answers in the audience. But they would take the contestants in this booth with really harsh lighting, and the camera would go in for this extreme close-up, and it was just, their forehead down to their chin, just a close-up shot of that, while the person is agonizing, trying to think about it in this very, very cramped, very, very claustrophobic little booth.
The show was a hit for its nail-biting high stakes and grandiose showmanship that kept viewers on the edge of their seats until the end. But this fame was short-lived once it was discovered that the series was, in fact, rigged.
They would have a quote-unquote warm-up session before the show. They would pull the contestants aside and say, now, we want to make sure that you're in a good frame of mind, and we want to make sure that you're ready to go and that you're not trying to collect yourself while you're on the stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you these warm-up questions before you go on stage. And they would just batter these contestants with 40 or 50 questions before they went on stage. And if it was a contestant that they wanted to do well, once they were on stage, it would be a question that they had answered correctly in the warm-up session. Or if it was a contestant they wanted to do well, they would ask them a question that they had missed, and they'd say, no, the answer to this question is Shakespeare. Now, don't forget that I told you that. The answer to this question was Shakespeare. And then the contestants would go on stage, and it would turn out that the warm-up questions were the real material.
Neediff says that as investigations widened, some contestants that were more subtly guided towards answers didn't believe that they had been duped.
When the DA from New York began investigating the quiz shows, the contestants were maintaining, no, my show wasn't rigged, I was honest. And what the DA was finding out was sometimes these shows were slick enough that it didn't occur to the contestants that the game was rigged. They would just think they were really lucky, or they would just think it worked out that way.
These revelations of deception eventually led to the demise of several prominent shows of that period, including the $64,000 Question. However, no legal action followed since it wasn't actually illegal at the time to rig these games. But soon after, in 1960, it was deemed illegal when Congress created an amendment to the Communications Act of 1934 prohibiting the fixing of game shows. Following this law, the programs adopted stricter rules on set, one being the added presence of third-party standards and practices representatives that still today oversee gameplay.
As an example of what just kind of makes you gnaw at your fingers whenever you work on game shows for a living is, for example, when James Holzhauer was on his run on Jeopardy, where he was just racking up over $100,000 a night by placing such big wagers and just dominating the game so much, James Holzhauer finally lost after about 30 games and fell just short of Ken Jennings' record. And you would hear people on the radio and you would see people on the internet saying, well, you know, what they probably did was they took him aside and they said, listen, you can't win. And it's just, as an employee of game shows who works in this world, no, they didn't. And you want to scream that to everybody who says that. You want to scream it to everyone who says, oh, well, they decided they wanted this guy to win, or they decided they didn't want this guy to win anymore. No, that absolutely does not happen. For one thing, James Holzhauer would have legal recourse, and he would have avenues to pursue if that happened to him. He could absolutely take the show to court if they did that.
While programs like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune are still doing remarkably well in ratings, many other game shows have fallen through the cracks. With so many options available on TV and streaming platforms these days, it's hard to imagine what the landscape may look like over the next 10 or 20 years.
There have already been some attempts to do game shows for streaming platforms, and one of the big priorities that comes up when you're pitching a show to a streaming platform is making it bingeable. And certainly that's a new area that game shows need to consider and keep in mind is this something that you can watch for more than 20 minutes? Is this something that you would just watch over and over and over again during a day? And there have been a lot of game shows over the years that, you know, you watch it and you enjoy it for 20 minutes, but then you want to move on to something else because the gameplay is repetitive or some other reason.
When thinking of new shows, Neediff says that producers often think favorably of reviving and modernizing old shows that did well in the past. In the end, it's less risk to reboot an older game show that was once popular compared to taking on an entirely new idea.
ABC has done some very well-done revivals in recent years. Of the shows that they've brought back, I think the $100,000 Pyramid with Michael Strahan is the best done. Very, very slick and very entertaining and very, very true to the original show in many ways.
Whatever the future holds for game shows, viewers will always be attracted to entertaining gameplay and people winning money. It might just look a bit different in the years to come. To find out more about this topic and our guest Adam Neediff, head to viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
As many as 89% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients are at risk of a complication called cytokine storm, a leading cause of COVID death. But there's good news. Hospitals across the U.S. are enrolling patients in a trial evaluating lenzilumab, an investigational treatment designed specifically to stop this storm, even with only 1 day of treatment. Dr. Cameron Durant, CEO of Humanigen, the company developing lenzilumab.
Having a therapeutic that can significantly reduce the time to recovery from COVID-19 and send patients home earlier could dramatically impact the arc of this pandemic.
Participating in the study means access to a potential treatment option in addition to standard of care therapies. Trial participant Mark Baranski shares his experience.
I don't know if I received lenzilumab or not, but I viewed the trial as doing everything I could for my recovery while contributing to the fight against COVID-19. I certainly encourage others to do the same.
To learn more and find this trial near you, visit StopStorm.com. That's StopStorm.com.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints. Coming up next week.
My genetics showed a very high sort of association with violence, aggression, and low interpersonal empathy. And those two biological markers then set me on a quest.
Exploring what we do and don't understand about psychopaths. Then,
people think of a black hole as a very dense object, but a black hole is actually not an object at all. It's more like a place.
The fascinating science behind black holes. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.